On this edition of the program, my thoughts on the day of confirmation hearings and a conversation with Michael Tracey. It's all coming up.
The following is brought to you by Just Another Pilot.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Politics program for January 31st, 2025. Your old pal Justin Robert Young joining you from Austin, Texas. We will be joined in a fun, lengthy conversation with Michael Tracey, somebody that I have been an admirer of and is one of the rare beings like me, you know, totally self-funded, flies himself to all of these news events and does some good shoe leather reporting. I think, you know, he's a lot more in that mold than I am in terms of actually interviewing people. I tend to just sort of sit in the back of the room and like assess the vibe. I'm more of a vibes merchant. He is more of an actually talk to people, which is really what a reporter does. I'm a total fraud. But still, you're going to really like it. I wanted to talk to him about current, you know, Trumpian events, and we just wound up talking about the 2024 election. So that's coming up in a second. Something before we get started. A lot of you emailed me. A lot of you reached out to me. A lot of you hit me up on Twitter saying that I should apply for the White House press corps' invitation to bloggers and podcasters. And I'm here to tell you that not only have I done that, but also I have been assured by Substack that they will work whatever channels they have to advocate for Substackers to get that opportunity. So we will see what happens, but just to update everybody who's reached out, thank you very much for doing so. And indeed, my application has been submitted. We will see if I get the Charlie Bucket golden ticket. But before we do, let me go ahead and give you my thoughts on the last 2 days, and specifically Thursday, the confirmation hearings that are ongoing. Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard, and RFK Jr. all spoke, and we will go kind of one by one. This was RFK Jr.'s second day in front of his inquisitors of the Senate, and it was a lot of the same conversations about statements that RFK Jr. has made about vaccines. With that being said, I have not seen much of a movement. You know, the big thing here is, again, don't focus on what the Democrats are saying. That's where all the coverage is. The coverage is in explosive back and forth between Democrats and these nominees. Doesn't matter. They can all vote against all three of them, and they are, you know, totally useless. The only thing that would be of note is if any of them voted for one of these nominees. Doesn't look like that's going to happen. Still, doesn't matter. What you're focusing on are what the Republicans are saying. And I have not seen anything that would make me believe right now that Republicans are going to vote against Bobby Kennedy, which is a very funny sentence to say, historically. It is a historically funny sentence to say. Republicans have not been this on the side of Bobby Kennedy since the McCarthy Commission. That'll be for all of the 70-year-olds listening, they're cracking up at that. Part of the reason why is because Bobby Kennedy is extraordinarily popular. If you look at public opinion polling, he is somebody that consistently rates pretty high. Number one, because the Kennedy name is something that still holds purchase with a wide swath of Americans. And number two, because there is a collection of people in America who share RFK's questioning of, forget vaccines for a second, big pharma, big agriculture. This is a very crunchy area. Let's remember that Jared Polis, the governor of Colorado, is a big RFK backer. He is somebody that has a lot of crunchy moms that voted for him. The way to attack RFK was going to be on abortion, where you do have pro-life senators that would vote against him if they felt that he was going to be too liberal. Let's remember, Bobby Kennedy is somebody who was pro-life pro-choice his entire career, his entire life. So now he is taking orders from ostensibly a pro-life president. How is that going to factor in? He answered a few questions about mifepristone, the abortion pill. He did not seem to be super in love with it, but I think that's something that is just going to be a part of how he moves through. So again, if all we're doing is looking at whether or not he's going forward, I think he's going forward. I will say the same thing about Kash Patel. Kash Patel had a very contentious hearing. He had specific blow-ups back and forth with Adam Schiff and Amy Klobuchar. They don't matter. He also had very supportive back and forth with all the Republican lawmakers. So regardless of whether or not you believe that he is somebody that is good or bad, I believe he is going to be confirmed. Where I don't know is with Tulsi Gabbard. So why are these different? Well, Tulsi Gabbard doesn't necessarily have the same purchase as Bobby Kennedy Jr. because his name is Bobby Kennedy Jr. Tulsi Gabbard also has deep skepticism from the intelligence community, if not out and out hatred from the intelligence community, because she has been very critical of the intelligence community in the past. She has been somebody that has advocated for the rights of citizens related to 702, that is the FISA provision, which allows people or the intelligence communities to spy on foreign actors, but her concern has always been that it can bleed over into spying on American citizens in America. She has also been supportive of Edward Snowden in the past. Now, I thought she came off well. You can understand why both parties at some point have taken a look at Tulsi Gabbard and said, wow, she's got talent. We should put her in front of cameras more. But I don't know if that matters to people that out and out believe she is somebody that would be bad for the intelligence community from the point of view of the intelligence community. You had a lot of pointed questions about 702. And the thing that wound up becoming the story, and this was bipartisan, and again, remember that the Democrats don't count here. It is what the Republicans are saying. But the Republicans continue to say, we want you to call Edward Snowden a traitor. So she said, well, Edward Snowden broke the law. There were other ways that Edward Snowden could have gone about revealing what he revealed, but what he revealed was illegal. But she wouldn't call him a traitor. She wouldn't call him a traitor. I will say personally, I find that a little silly. It reminds me of our friend Musa El-Garbi and his conversations about elites and elites who are in the symbolic capitalism world, meaning that you are very much concerned about how things are shaped. So it's not enough to say that Edward Snowden should be held criminally liable, or that she will not say that Edward Snowden deserves a pardon. No, he needs to be personally shaped as a traitor. Why won't you cross that line into an emotional term of traitor. But the fact that that was the case, whether or not I find that silly, is revealing. Because it reveals that there might be some people whom will not be moved to put Tulsi Gabbard in the intersection of our intelligence agencies. And that's what the Director of National Intelligence is supposed to do. Now, there were a few people that suggested she could be a reformer, that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence has become unwieldy. It was never meant to do its own intelligence gathering, and they believe that it has. But still, I could really see this going one way or another. And like, if the Tulsi Gabbard nomination can't kind of take flight, it will be probably revealed in the next 72 hours. So let's take a look at the twitchy crypto freaks on Polymarket. It appears as if the markets agree with me. You have Kash Patel, who has stood at 95% after his hearing. RFK is at about 73%. That's a touchdown from where it was before. It was around 78 before. And Tulsi Gabbard, who was at 50% when we talked to Jen Briney earlier this week, remains around there at 51. I have seen it basically in that realm. It has not meaningfully dipped below 50 as I've watched it today. But I don't think that's great. I don't think that the idea that this is a coin flip is great for her. Now, I will say again that Tulsi Gabbard has created one of the strangest coalitions I've seen in modern politics, where you have like hardcore MAGA people that are uniting arm in arm with Tom Cotton and Meghan McCain. But I suspect she will probably be where the Trump team puts the majority of their effort. Because if they're able to hold together for RFK, and if Kash Patel is not going to be particularly hard to clear, which is very surprising to me, because he has, thrown... If part of the reason why Matt Gaetz was a non-starter is because he has personally said a lot of mean things about people for whom he needs votes from, Kash Patel has done the same thing. The difference is that Kash Patel does have a history in the world of law enforcement, whereas Matt Gaetz has never done that. But still, I would suspect that Tulsi Gabbard probably going to be the person that gets the most attention, and so we will go from there. Not a ton of surprises here. I do think that by and large, the person who has seemed the least equipped to do stuff is RFK Jr. But RFK Jr. has been a very, very famous person who has pontificated, by himself, where everybody is just kind of waiting in rapt attention for a very long time. He was somebody that I thought was going to be the kind of least prepared for it, because he has this born to do it sort of literally born to do it. He's Bobby Kennedy's son, kind of heir to him. But also he's the most popular of the three of them. So it doesn't matter all that much. I don't think so. So it'll be Tulsi. How much will the Trump team step up for her? We will see. All right, we got the update, and then we're coming back with Michael Tracey. This is your update, brought to you by TakePoliticsSeriously.com. That's where you support us on Substack. Thank you to everybody who has done it for the low price of $3 a week. For the price of a cup of coffee, it's $12 a month. You get 2 bonus episodes each and every week. Each and every week. That's what you get. One on Sunday, one on Thursday. And, we're not in the Biden administration anymore, folks. We are in the Trump administration. And that means that news is happening constantly. So go ahead and get on board. That is TakePoliticsSeriously.com. we're going to read something from the New York Times here. Staffing at the air traffic control tower at Reagan International Airport was not normal at the time of a deadly late-night crash between a passenger jet and an Army helicopter that killed 67 people. A preliminary Federal Aviation Administration report has said the bodies of the victims were being recovered at the time of this report from the icy Potomac River. The initial report, reviewed by the New York Times, said the controller who was handling helicopters in the airport's vicinity on Wednesday was also instructing planes that were landing and departing from its runways, jobs typically assigned to two different controllers. President Trump promised on Thursday that a thorough investigation would be conducted, while also engaging in political attacks on his predecessors. Among the victims on Flight 5342 were several figure skaters who were coming from the National Figure Skating Championships in Wichita, Kansas. That included citizens of both the United States and Russia. Of course, American Airlines has said that 60 passengers and 4 crew members were aboard the jet. The military said the UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter was on a routine training flight. The two collided at 9 o'clock p.m. Among the many figure skaters aboard the flight, several friends returning to the East Coast from a duck hunt in Kansas were on the plane. So, what you will likely see a lot of is that Donald Trump, as well as incoming Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy and Vice President J.D. Vance, were very mad about DEI. Now, at the time that I'm recording this, what I just read you is the latest thing that we know. I do not know what the administration knows. I will say, personally, that I am not the biggest fan of scoring political points before all the bodies are out of the river. But with that being said, I do believe that there is something that will come up, which it's been on my radar for a little bit because it was reported on a podcast that I listened to, Blocked and Reported. And I would encourage people to follow Tracing Woodgrains on Twitter. He is the one that's really put the most effort into this. And this is a long-standing class action lawsuit by people that went to specific education centers to become air traffic controllers and then were unable to. And their allegation against the FAA is that they were not hired for positions that they were qualified for based on their race. They were white. The reason why is because there were explicit quotas that were put in during the Obama administration, and then they were enforced more with the Biden administration to beef up diversity within the air traffic controllers' ranks. Again, the information in this class action lawsuit I found compelling. This was something that I'd heard about long before this particular incident. This class action lawsuit was cited by J.D. Vance. We have no idea whether or not that lack of air traffic controllers is something that caused the accident, whether or not somebody was just in the bathroom, whether or not they were sick that night, and it was a random circumstance as opposed to, a systemic lack of talent in that position, that very, very important position. But it does appear that somebody was doing two persons' jobs. So that is going to be something that is talked about. I will suspend judgment until we go forward because I don't want to get in over my skis on this. But I do want you guys to be aware of it as we go forward, just so you have a sense of the lay of the land. And in a little less serious news. Vivek Ramaswamy leads the Ohio Republicans' gubernatorial primary by 34 points with over 50% support in a pro-Ramaswamy group poll in his quest to be the lead executive of the great state of Ohio. The former Department of Government Efficiency co-leader is entering state politics after leaving the Trump administration. Ramaswamy has recruited key staffers from Vice President J.D. Vance's team, including pollster Tony Fabrizio, Andy Sarabian, and Ajay Charabia. With Vance's team on board, Ramaswamy is securing an endorsement from pro-Trump figures like Senator Rick Scott, who is the former governor of Florida, before his official announcement, which will happen at some point in February. The poll is done by Tony Fabrizio, who was Donald Trump's pollster and is a veteran Republican pollster. He's been good, so I don't mistrust the poll. What you would say is that Vivek Ramaswamy is very popular amongst Trump circles. He is by far the leader in the clubhouse to receive Trump's endorsement for that race. And whatever coaching tree Mike DeWine, the current Republican governor, would like to deploy, well, it's probably going to be an uphill battle. Is Ramaswamy somebody that could be had in a general? I'd say yes to anybody that has not won a race. And Ramaswamy, for as much press as he's done, has not, won a political office yet in his life. I think that you always run the risk of getting in over your skis. We already saw that Ramaswamy came out and had some very controversial statements about whether or not America has a culture that is conducive to excellence. Well, now he's going to have to go into, rural Ohio and explain why he believes he is the best person to run that state with no experience. But those kind of numbers are enough to keep talented people out of a race. If you know you're going to get run over, then maybe you focus on something else. But we'll see. That's your update. TakePoliticsSeriously.com is where you need to go. Head on over there, get 2 bonus episodes each and every week. It's either $12 a month or for less than $100, you can set it and forget it for a year. For a year, my friends. All right. Let's go ahead and talk to Michael Tracey. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to welcome to the show somebody that has done great work making his politics debut, Michael Tracey. Welcome to the show, buddy.
Great to be with you.
So, for folks who are not familiar with your work, you are an independent journalist. I've seen you around on the campaign trail. I think the thing that I felt closest to you on was during this primary season, you complaining about how annoying the press gatekeeping was with this primary season compared to primary seasons of the past, because I was having the exact same situation. It was a very niche complaint, but for whatever reason, on the Republican side, the Democratic side, it wasn't even a question. They've always been locked down. But the Republican side, usually there's at least some catch can for people to just show up and cover things. But both Trump and Nikki Haley were just such pains in the asses. So I appreciated you giving voice to that.
What was my complaint? Remind me.
Oh, just that they were being hard asses, but kicking people out. Either the Nikki Haley campaign specifically, I think that was your complaint. And I just had a similar situation where they wouldn't credential you. And then you just show up with the crowd, oftentimes in half-filled spaces, just to experience it. And then you'd get Gestapo made in the crowd of like, hey, are you covering this? It's like, well, yeah, I flew across the country so I could cover the race. I'm curious to, catch the vibes here a little bit. And then they'd yell at you.
Yeah, I got thrown out of a Nikki Haley event in Iowa because I didn't even bother trying to get credentialed. Usually it's not even worth it. And on top of that, sometimes I feel like it's better to absorb oneself into the general crowd if you can. You kind of get a better feel of things rather than being sequestered into this special little media area, which I think often gives a distorted view to journalists on the scene of what's going on. But I tried to do something that I thought was pretty straightforward, which is I went up to Nikki Haley when she was doing her after-event selfie line thing.
Yeah.
Introduced myself, tried to ask a question, and the odd thing was, and I often find this, the candidate or the principal tends to be more willing to actually engage with the questioning than her hyper-paranoid staff.
Yes.
So she initially was willing to answer my question. It was actually about long-range missile strikes in Russia before that had been officially authorized by the Biden administration, which happened a few months later. But she was willing to give a brief response, but the staff gets so agitated and excited that they swarm, and I got muscled out as though I were some kind of, I don't know, protester or something, which I wasn't. I mean, nothing against protesters, but that wasn't my role. And so, yeah, that's how it worked with the Nikki Haley event. I did find that Ron DeSantis was eventually a little bit more accessible. In the early stages of the primary, if you remember, when he was seen to be more viable, potentially.
Yep.
I never thought he was particularly viable, just given the stranglehold that Trump had on the Republican
certainly before the indictments. Before the indictments, at least the polling bore out a little bit of like that this was a more of a jump ball, and then post-indictments, it was a rally around Trump, and that was a wrap.
Even before the indictments, I always thought his viability was way overstated, particularly by people in the conservative media who felt more of an affinity with him, felt like he was more of a useful kind of representation of their preferences for how the Republican Party ought to be managed. Whereas Trump,
competent Trump was the brand.
And also Trump without the constant
Trumpiness,
drama and craziness. But I always thought that given that Trump was going to be running as a quasi-incumbent, it's virtually impossible to dislodge somebody, especially with his purchase among factions of the party. So even pre-indictment, I thought that DeSantis' viability was being way overstated. But when his operation, and some people in the media thought that he was more viable than he ultimately proved to be, and which I always thought that he was, he had very little press access. But then as the primary season wore on, they kind of gradually liberalized his press availability. And so by Iowa, which turned out to be the only contest that he ran in,
that he actually made it to.
He was more accessible to press, I found. I don't know if you went to his events, but I asked him a question about it was on the night that Biden first started bombing the Houthis in Yemen. So this is January of 2024. And he gave a fairly cogent response, and there wasn't a swarm of hysterical aides trying to arbitrarily put an end to the interaction. And then with Trump, it doesn't really matter because there's no opportunity to access.
There's
him
no.
Even in 2016, there wasn't. Like I went to early Trump events in New Hampshire. In like late 2015, early 2016, and he would be the only candidate who'd be having events at like rally style events at a high school auditorium or something. And there would just be no opportunity. Like there were no coffee clatches with Trump. There were no. Lesser candidates would have to hold like little backyard barbecues,
pancake breakfasts, and stuff like that.
Yeah,
that's usually
like a backyard barbecue or something where you could just mingle with the candidate. Like I went to a Scott Walker backyard barbecue type thing in New Hampshire where I was just like mingling with John McCain and Lindsey Graham. And Trump had no equivalent of that. So,
No.
I mean, one of the ironies of Trump is he actually put a kibosh to some of the unique idiosyncrasies of the primary process, where if you happen to live in New Hampshire and you're a political obsessive, or you're just somebody who's interested in the process, you can actually go and get pretty robust firsthand impressions of the candidate, maybe even talk to them, unlike most people everywhere else in the country. But Trump showed that was not necessary to partake in.
Well, certainly not. Yeah, certainly not for the way that he was doing things. At least in terms of like the rally size, I think that was the big thing that he was focused on. You know, you still do some of the show up to the Pizza Ranch or the Red Arrow Diner in New Hampshire, but that's not the long form discussions that you would see with other candidates. But then again, it's like, for other candidates, getting 6 people together in the same room is usually about the limit of what they can do on any kind of given basis, unless they're partnering with something else or going to a church or something.
Yeah, I mean, the point is that as far as I can recall, there was never really much of an opportunity to have just a casual chat.
No,
with Donald Trump in the same
Yeah.
way that you probably would have been able to with many other candidates, in which I have. Now, you know, as the candidate gets more prominent and viable, that opportunity becomes less and less available. So, I don't recall like Hillary Clinton having that opportunity in the 2016 primaries in New Hampshire either. But anyway, so in 2024, Trump would still be having. Trump didn't campaign that much in the 2024 primaries. He didn't need to.
I don't think that
He didn't go to the debates, right? So I mean, that actually was the one of the rare times where I actually was able to have an interaction with Trump, brief as it was at a Republican primary debate in 2016. When after the debate he would come and shake hands and just kind of take random questions. So I was able to just kind of shout a brief question at him. But even in 2024, he correctly calculated that would not be necessary.
No,
and he paid no price for that.
Certainly not.
The Republican, the RNC, who actually co-hosts these debates with the different media outlets, inflicted no penalty on the leading candidate for just totally abjuring that entire process and rendering the debates essentially moot, except as a second-tier competition for who could be the biggest Trump sycophant. Hence the emergence of Vivek.
Of Vivek, yeah, exactly, right, yeah, and that was he was the Silver Surfer to Galactus, and really kind of made his bones destroying Nikki Haley or whomever was seen to be by the Trump world as the number one possible threat down the line. Yeah, it's interesting to look at this primary season kind of as the muted element that it was. Even Iowa kind of sucked because it was frozen solid. So it's like, nope, I think that the amount of events and certainly the amount of just random Iowa-ness that you would normally get just sort of being on the ground in Des Moines or the surrounding environs was not there. And then by New Hampshire, we kind of knew what was going on, like Ron DeSantis saw the writing on the wall and dropped out. The only question was whether or not Nikki Haley was going to stay in, how she would do in New Hampshire. That would possibly set up some kind of elongation of it. That didn't happen. And so it was kind of a wrap. Although I guess the rest of the campaign, the general sort of made up for it in terms of interesting, newsworthy elements that wound up happening.
Yeah, the 2024 Iowa caucus was one of the rare times where he actually could justifiably blame low turnout on the weather.
Yeah,
because
people don't get that, because you were there. That was not cold. That was like surface of Mars cold. Like I saw like abandoned cars like sliding down the
it was negative
like,
40.
Ice. Yeah, it was insane. It was not like people were like, oh, well, it's Iowa, they're hardy, they'll get out. Anybody who got out, that's why, like when that Ann Seltzer poll came out that had Trump losing to Kamala, I'm like, look, I saw hundreds of thousands of people risk their lives on like black ice roads so they could go to a caucus and vote for that dude. I do not think that his popularity has dropped in the intervening, 10 months.
Well, I mean, DeSantis had like surrogates come from Florida.
Yeah.
Who would go to the caucus meeting, I was at one, and, make their address. So they had to come from South Florida to negative 40 degrees in Iowa. I actually, in one of my biggest physical foibles of my life, I tripped and fell on a curb somehow in Iowa, in Des Moines, in negative 40
This year?
degrees. No, last year. Right.
Oh yeah,
right,
no, yeah. 2024. Sorry, my brain is still living in that.
Yeah, right ahead of the Happy New Year. I'm going to violate the Larry David rule and wish you a Happy New Year just to remind you that it's 2025.
It is. Thank you.
No, yeah, right around I think it was the night before the Iowa caucus.
That
night
was
after.
brutal.
No, the night after, and I was like it was like a tree trunk falling. Like I was just like in my the earth stood still, and I just kind of tumbled over, like a tree falling in the woods and nobody hearing it, and I hit my elbow on the ground and it crashed against my ribs when I broke my ribs.
Jesus.
And I was like just lying there in negative 40 degrees, like in just a alternate state of consciousness for a while. But yeah, that was my big snafu of the 2024 primaries. And then for like a week, it was manageable. Like it hurt a little bit, but didn't really seem like I needed any kind of emergency care or anything. And, I was Googling around what to do when you crack your rib, first time for me. And there's not much you can do in terms of
wrap it up, put some ice on it. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, put some ice on it initially and then just kind of wait a couple months or something. But then I went to New Hampshire like a week later.
Yep.
Or a few days later. And I went to a Dean Phillips event because it was like one of the few things that was available to do.
Yep.
And I had like an interview set up with him. And when I'm at this Dean Phillips event, I'm just like standing there and I make like just a motion side to side.
Oh.
And like something dislodges.
Oh.
And like I'm short of breath and I'm in like major pain. I can't do anything. I still have to do this interview with Dean Phillips. And yeah, so there was some physical, especially if you don't like me, major physical comedy. In terms of the suffering I had to endure. But just imagine lying on the sidewalk in Des Moines, Iowa, and negative 40 with broken ribs, and trying to figure out how to just stand up.
In that that weather specifically, I was there with my friend Andrew Heaton, and the day after the caucus, we went to, because I think planes were canceled or whatever, because normally I would get the hell out immediately. For whatever reason, it was. I was there the next day through the morning, and it had like warmed up to like 1 degree. Like it was something where it had not been marginally as cold as it was before. And we went to whatever that Des Moines, the pizza place that does like wonton pizza. I forget what it is, but it's one of the places that you go in Des Moines when you're.
So not Pizza Ranch, not the chain.
Not Pizza Ranch. No, it's another one in downtown. Anyway, we both were like rushing to the car, and we both realized that we thought we would be able to get away without long johns, but it was like shivering. Like it was bone chilling cold on a level that I am from South Florida, so I am not exactly the hardiest when it comes to cold weather, but that was extraordinary. So I can't imagine laying on the ground in negative 4 degree weather with a I mean, maybe it would just put you closer to death, which might bring you some level of ease.
I'm able to withstand the cold more than most, I find. Like whenever I'm in the presence of women, they're always like dying of how cold they are, and I can like be pretty manageable with it. And so even a negative 40, like if I'm just like going from the car to the auditorium or something and you're just outside for 2 minutes, like I'm okay.
Yeah.
But
to tough it out.
Yeah, I could tough it out, but lying on the curb and writhing in pain was a little bit different of an experience. And actually, that was my kind of mental context for the inauguration too, because it ended up being brought indoors because of the weather allegedly, and it was like a tropical climate compared to Iowa.
Compared to Des Moines. Yeah. Oh my God, yeah, no, it was balmy. Let me ask you this, because we're talking about Iowa so much. Where are you at on the idea of the Democrats moving their caucus out of Iowa? You think that's a good or a bad idea for them?
Well, I mean, there are a few different ways to look at it. I'm just looking at it from their self-interested standpoint, like what is best for the Democrats. I might caution them not to abolish the Iowa caucus, because how did Barack Obama become a national figure?
Bing.
He spent 2 years almost
Uh-huh.
painstakingly organizing in Iowa. A black candidate who proved that he could win in like a 98% white state. And that gave him an opportunity to cut into what had, for almost the entirety of the 2008 primaries, been a intractable national lead by Hillary Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives like an upstart candidate an ability to prove that they have some political skill that they can showcase that they wouldn't be able to do if it was a national primary or even if it was someplace other less idiosyncratic than Iowa. Jimmy Carter was the same. I mean, he won. He decided to expend resources in the early stages of the 1976 Democratic primaries, and whatever you may think of Jimmy Carter, he was not a nationally known figure prior to running. So if abolishing the Iowa caucus means that these races are just going to be more nationalized, that I think lessens the opportunity for upstart candidates to prove that they're politically formidable. And also, like, from a slightly different standpoint, I was maybe this is just like arbitrary nostalgia or something, or an arbitrary perspective overall, but I kind of always have thought that the primary schedule since 2004, 2008, so Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina, is a fairly decent cross-section of the country.
Yeah.
With mid-sized states, so it's not California, Texas, Florida, or something where if you don't have a lot of money, you really can't compete.
You can't play.
Those are all mid-markets, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you don't have to buy into the New York market or the Los Angeles market or something in terms of TV. So it kind of opens the competitiveness of it a little bit to less star-powered candidates or candidates with less money. So I don't know. Maybe as somebody who just kind of likes idiosyncratic American political traditions for no particularly good reason.
Dude, we're best friends. This is like one of my hobby horses that I think it is really stupid for the Democrats specifically to get rid of Iowa, because it is predictive on the Democratic side. It's rarely predictive on the Republican side unless it's a total rout, because they have so many evangelicals that skews the pool a little bit. You get your Ted Cruz's and your Mike Huckabees. But on the Democratic side, it actually matters. It's a cheap state. You can drive everywhere. You can buy TV. There's also just generations now of experienced hands, so you can build a staff fairly quickly that you don't have to pay top prices for. You get a sense of it. And also, it's been pretty good at weeding out bad campaigns. Like it usually, if you bomb in Iowa, if you totally bomb in Iowa, then it might mean that there are problems with your campaign. And
Biden even wants to get rid of Biden even tried to get rid of New Hampshire.
New Hampshire too.
I mean, New Hampshire, I have even more of a nostalgic attachment to than Iowa, just because I grew up in New Jersey, so it was more within reasonable driving distance.
Yeah.
The first time I was politically aware, which was the 2008 cycle. So that was like before I was doing media. So I, just volunteered for Obama in that cycle. And yeah, I mean, it's unlike anything that's available anywhere else in the country, with the possible exception of Iowa, and then you add on South Carolina and Nevada.
But even then, and
there's like institutional knowledge. I mean, so the citizenry is actually really into it.
That's it. Because from going to these states, there is Iowa and New Hampshire are about equal in terms of people caring about. You go to a bar, you sit down, the random person next to you will tell you their top 4 picks, what they've seen about them. They can go issue by issue on the things that they believe in. That falls off a cliff when New Hampshire's done. Nobody cares in Nevada. Nobody cares in South Carolina. And when you go state by state, the level of even just awareness of these contests are vanishing compared to those first two.
And also, I think there's something condescending, if maybe politically irrational, in Biden thinking, let's have South Carolina first, because I know the black Democratic vote in South Carolina is just going to be a reliable block that I don't even have to do anything for necessarily other than pander to.
Yeah.
And, they are that's a more socially conservative block, especially in the Deep South, even compared to black demographics elsewhere in the country, like the Midwest, which were, if you remember, a little bit more pro-Bernie.
Yep.
Still basically favor quote unquote establishment Democrats overall, but it differs somewhat. And also in South Carolina, they're more, just given the political lineage of South Carolina, they're more kind of responsive to political
Jim
machines,
Clyburn.
essentially, like the Jim Clyburn thing.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, there really isn't the same kind of political machine you can activate in Iowa or New Hampshire and get a big block of the vote. Nevada, you can to some extent with the unions in Las Vegas, Clark County, and whatnot. But even if you're going to claim that you have this issue with like a lack of diversity in Iowa and New Hampshire, that South Carolina and Nevada kind of make up for that because you have the Latino and then the black demographics represented in, again, mid-sized states that are at least potentially viable for people who don't have boatloads of money to compete in.
Yeah. Yeah. It always, I don't know. Of all the things, even Matt Iglesias this morning was talking about the Democrats need to throw the Biden under the bus. If that is the case, and he is somebody who represents a element of normie Democratic thinking, then start there. Start with those dumb primary reforms. Those were bad. And also, if you look at the people that you need to win now, maybe these whites aren't so bad. Maybe you do need to go to a Big Ten state and talk about football and steak fries and what it was like in church this weekend. Those are the kind of votes that you're going to need going forward if you look at what the results were in 2024.
Well, Trump was basically steady with white voters in 2024. The biggest gains, as I'm sure you know, were with non-white voters. So the voters that were most additive to the pre-existing Trump coalition were non-white voters. I mean, Trump maybe went up a point with white voters or stayed even compared to 2020, depending on where you look in the country. So there might be some debate over how that translates to how the Democrats should organize their primary
were
schedule.
Expecting more gains, but what didn't show up was that Trump was flat. And Trump being flat was kind of a win because you were looking at more of the flee of the suburban white vote into the Democratic column. That didn't happen.
But that did happen in 2020.
It
when
did
Biden
happen
was
in
actually the
2020.
nominee. Biden was not the nominee in 2024. Ultimately.
That's true. Yeah, so maybe this is a common.
I mean, I think a lot of it is more. I mean, I was kind of a dead ender in thinking, and I still part of me still thinks, I can't prove it. Obviously, it's a counterfactual, but I part of me, there's like a voice inside my head that still thinks that it was politically dumb to put in Kamala Harris when she had no political bona fides compared to Biden. Like, I think, I still think there's a decent case to be made that Biden, notwithstanding his diminished state, would have been a better nominee than Kamala Harris. Because Biden, at least, Biden didn't give the impression of being, totally foisted on the electorate. Like, I would go and talk to people in the general election in Pennsylvania or North Carolina or other places, and people would just be like, wait, where the hell did this lady come from? Like, how did anybody vote for her? Which nobody did. I mean, it was an insider machination that...
By the way, another campaign that was killed by Iowa, which means that Iowa is probably a good indicator that if you can't even make it to caucus day...
Biden was almost killed by Iowa, but he hung in, and then
and New Hampshire
was vaulted by South Carolina. And if there are any right wing people listening to this, they're going to get really mad just by my saying that Biden won the 2020 election. But he did. I mean, he was in office for 4 years.
That's controversial. No.
And that was largely bolstered by his performance in these more affluent suburban areas, which, I mean, you could argue if is over-reliance on affluent suburbs the ideal political paradigm for Democrats? Maybe not. But in 2020, maybe in an aberrational year, it was at least enough to put him over the edge in with Cobb County, Georgia in places. And he won the election. So that was actually... people aren't going to talk about it now because, Biden, Matt Iglesias wants to throw Biden under the bus or whatever. But just in terms of raw political achievement, I think the 2020 primaries and then general election was a pretty big achievement on Biden's part. I mean, he won, despite... What amazed me about Biden, I wrote about this way early in the 2020 cycle, so spring of 2019. was that Biden did not have much support among the Democratic intelligentsia.
Yeah.
In terms of like online media operatives, like even the Obama operatives were not necessarily enthusiastic about Biden running.
The Pod Johns.
Yeah, I think my kind of thought experiment at that time was like if you surveyed every online media personality who had some allegiance with or was like a Democrat in some form, what percentage in the primaries would have supported Biden, right, over Warren, Bernie, Buttigieg, et cetera? I think it's got to be like less than 5%, if that. So for obviously they all coalesced around him as the primaries wore on, and he was the main only alternative to Trump. But early on, Biden was not in 2020 or 2019, 2020 what like the activist core of the Democratic Party thought the party should be represented by.
Yeah.
And yet he wins anyway. I mean, obviously there was some party maneuvering in the fateful
post South Carolina. You have the Stop Bernie movement before Super Tuesday.
But nonetheless, I mean, just in terms of raw political achievement, if you can orchestrate things where the party coalesces at the opportune time, that's how the party systems tend to work in the United States. So he did it, and then he wins the 2020 election, and I guess, like, according to Matt Iglesias, not that I'm a Biden defender. I'm not. I don't really. Never supported Biden, but I do think that there's like something to be said about his political tacticianship. I guess being underrated as it relates to 2020. Now in 2024, don't
think that there was a lot to speak for there, but yeah. I mean, I agree with you that if we get to, the moment to speak up was the primaries. The moment to speak up for the Democrats, where it's like, look, any of these donors that eventually got all mad, like Ari from Entourage, who's going to stomp around in some Aspen forum and scream and yell after the debate went bad. It's like your time to spend money on somebody, your time to put somebody up was at the primaries. It was to do damage to Biden, where he was going to be forced out and embarrassed to have a diminished run at that point. Once you lock into him, it doesn't matter what happens. Either you're rolling with him, or if I'm totally looking at this only from the game theory of what would the Trump campaign not want to have happen, it would have been an old school convention. Like, scrap all the pomp and circumstance, scrap all the managed within a second of time speeches, do an old school multiple ballot convention. It would be a media sensation. It would blow everything else off the page. Would you wind up nominating somebody that was probably less than? Would they be maybe an also-ran that eventually gets coalesced around? Probably, but you're in an uphill battle anyway. You just had to kill your nominee. This is not the best way to move into it.
You're in a Hail Mary situation.
Exactly.
That's what Ezra Klein and people have been agitating for since like the previous March or April or something.
Yeah.
So he's like, look, Ezra Klein is like the soothsayer for anguished Democratic readers of the New York Times and stuff. So he's like saying, look, people, like as much as we respect Biden's accomplishments, and like they always have to preface with the throat clearing.
The greatest one-term presidency in history.
Yeah,
exalted Joseph Robinette Biden.
However, like maybe we should consider having a convention. And then all of a sudden, Kamala gets coronated within like a matter of hours.
Yep.
With no public input.
Nope.
And Ezra Klein is just like, yeah, this is great. Like, brat summer. There's no consistency, at least that I could gather from him and other people who, Ezra Klein and Matt Iglesias, they were just, they're journalists of some kind, but they're really kind of pro-Democrat. They started out as pro-Democratic bloggers.
Yes.
Who kind of transitioned into some journalistic capacity.
Well, look, I think
whenever the status quo is in the party, they figure out a way to say that this is good, and critics of it need to pipe down, or else the big bad Republicans are going to come in. And I think that was a time to say that, look, maybe you should talk to some more voters, because people were telling me like that I was too much of a stickler for process. And voters don't care about process. However, like voters don't have to be super informed about the intricacies of Democratic primary process or delegate allocation to have rightfully a sense that all of a sudden Kamala Harris, who had very little profile as vice president, independent of Biden, and had flamed out horribly in 2020. People forget, but in the 2020 Democratic primaries, I have a screenshot of this that I'm going to keep keeping for posterity. Nate Silver was like, "Yeah, Kamala Harris is clearly the front runner for the nomination."
Oh yeah. Oh no. There was Trump was mostly worried about her about when she did that big Oakland rally to start things off.
Well, if Trump was in agreement with Nate Silver, then they were both delusional at the time, because I never thought that she. I mean, it was so condescending. The idea that Kamala Harris, a prosecutor from Berkeley, had this natural connection to black Democratic voters in the Deep South.
Yeah.
Especially against Obama's vice president.
Yeah.
I thought was it was a pundit-brained, specious kind of inference about the nature of the electorate and about Kamala Harris's identity traits, because obviously that had very little purchase, if any, among the demographics that were assumed to have been in her camp, right? In fact, the old white guy, quote unquote, was the one who benefited most from those demographics. Anyway, fast forwarding to 2024, she obviously performs terribly in 2020, and then as much as you don't think voters care about process, they do absorb reality-based information about the nature of political affairs. And what happened was Kamala was just coordinated as the nominee virtually out of nowhere for reasons that were not really ever articulated, except for this choreographed thing where everybody was trying to make it seem utterly normal.
Yes.
Whereas Trump, I mean, nobody was confused about why Trump had garnered enough support within the Republican Party to become nominee for the third consecutive time.
He was very popular with his voters. He had a natural constituency, and then he went through a traumatic event that bound people to him.
So with Kamala, I mean, I would, for this general election, I made a special point to talk to like low propensity voters as far as I could identify them in the various states. And when we talk about Kamala, like something always came up, which was correct, which was that to these people who don't follow the political process closely, but still correctly, surmised that she was this strange imposition, rather than somebody who had any kind of popular mandate to get into this position that she attained. And she had only attained it because the Democrats decided to basically blow up the primary process.
Which, I mean, to my knowledge, really only benefited the fact that they didn't have to shake up the campaign, which seems like also a bad idea. Like, they just kept the exact same thing. They took one part out, put another part in. That was the easiest way to do it. It was the cleanest way to do it. And then the money fountains, started again. But I don't know. It's the thing that struck it for me was that part of the reason why Biden, among the many reasons why Biden's administration had problems and his campaign also had problems, were this failure to understand what the people were frustrated about and an inability to talk about it. And if you have no idea how to do it in your administration, they didn't seem to have any more idea how to do it with the campaign. And so there was just a lot of shut up and take it. Just shut up and take it. The prices aren't actually higher. This is not really all that bad in the Middle East. I didn't trip over that thing. This is a cheap fake or whatever. There was just a lot of like, no, actually, no, actually, no, actually. And then ultimately it gets so bad that he needs to go. And their solution is, no, actually, it's Kamala. And so it's just another a quadruple down on the same problem that got them to where they are, regardless of Joe Biden's age. And obviously, I think that may or may not be a larger scandal, especially if some of his enablers now want to tell on him. But that was, I think it really is just a general problem with Democratic thought in general, is this idea that all messaging needs to be protected, no matter what. That's the important thing. The important thing is that the message remains consistent. And not only is that, I think, harmful in a political reality where people need to feel some movement. They need to feel some blood. They need to feel that you're human, that you go through processes where it's like you make a mistake and you say you made a mistake, whatever those things are, those bind the populace to a candidate, but also it prevents you from doing any kind of course correction in real time. And this has been a consistent issue. And I hope for their sake, at least for anybody who is on the Democratic side, you better hope that there's just a little bit of vulnerability that creeps into this so they don't feel like they need to slap down these two people. I mean, hell, what's happening right now as we are recording this is RFK Jr. is doing his confirmation hearing. Tulsi Gabbard's going to be doing her confirmation hearing tomorrow. Both of those people were run out of the Democratic Party with pitchforks and torches because they dared to in any way question the message. They would probably still be within the Democratic coalition if people just said, look at them, and moved on. You were going to win anyway, but they had to be run out of the coalition. They had to be oppoed out of the coalition. And now they're on the other side. They are taking cabinet positions, and they probably took whatever slivers of the populace that would otherwise be voting for your party to the other party, or were emblematic of that. And I think that's something that they do need to look at.
Yeah. I mean, I think the degree to which RFK Jr. was run out of the Democratic Party can be a bit overstated. Like, he could have continued running in the Democratic primaries. He chose to drop out in October of 2023. Like, nobody was forcing. I mean, obviously, the DNC and allied groups were engaging in litigation against his ballot access. But when he was a Democrat nominally, he could have. He was on the ballot in New Hampshire. He could have ran. He chose not to. He chose to become an independent. He chose to subsume himself into the Republican Party, which I think was kind of a contradiction from his message that he was challenging the so-called two-party duopoly.
Well, certainly so.
And he ended up strengthening it and becoming a Republican operative. And it's somewhat a similar story with Tulsi Gabbard. But anyway, I always thought that it was going to be an uphill climb for any Democrat, Biden or not, to win against Trump in 2024. I wrote about this, almost a year ago, for the deceptively simple reason that for the first time in modern American history, a former president was running as a quasi-incumbent.
Yeah.
And if you look at the approval ratings of former presidents once they leave office, whether it's George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, their approval ratings inevitably go way up because people look back on them with kind of like a nostalgic fondness, whereas in the moment, when they're in power, the approval kind of goes more along traditional kind of partisan lines.
Yeah.
And so for the first time in modern history, probably history ever, because I don't think it's hard to draw any parallels between public opinion under Grover Cleveland.
I was going to say, I was having a hard time finding Matt Iglesias' writing on Grover Cleveland.
Yeah, so basically for the first time ever, a former president was able to leverage that inevitable uptick in nostalgic reminiscence for a contemporaneous campaign, especially if there are problems in the moment. It's just like people look back on their childhoods, right? Everybody, unless you had a really traumatic childhood, generally people look back on their childhood and say, oh, things were better for X, Y, and Z reason then, or you'll even watch any 90s music video and you'll see comments with people saying, oh, the 90s were the best.
Yeah.
It'll never be like that again. So that's just a human instinct that kicks in as people age and as they kind of process their life experiences. And it was just a totally unprecedented thing for a former president to be able to leverage that and marshal that into a campaign. Notwithstanding all the other, peculiarities about Trump with his legal issues or anything else.
Yeah.
And, so especially given people's maybe misgivings, rightly, about the Biden-Harris administration, having an alternative presented who people was no longer a novelty, known commodity. The United States did not collapse into, quote, fascism between 2017 and 2021. Trump was an extremely viable candidate. And another reason why I thought he was going to win the primaries without even lifting a finger, essentially.
Yeah.
Because why roll the dice on a Ron DeSantis to win Pennsylvania when you have proof that a Republican
There's
can
a
win
guy who could do it.
the Midwest and who's already done it.
Yeah, but he also did the opposite. And that's the other thing that gets into that primary was that, like, post January 6th, post 2012 or 2022 midterms, there was this idea of like, oh, well, this has never been more shambolic. This has never been more tainted. This has never been more damaged goods. But as history proved. But as you pointed
Trump wasn't
out,
on the ballot in 2022. I mean, that was another big
that's the
fallacy.
other thing. I'm so glad you mentioned that because that was it. When all the poll heads were like, oh, well, look, the Democratic message really resonated and Biden very much took 2022 as a referendum on himself, reportedly. I was like, yeah, but like, and this is why I would bet on the Democrats in these midterms is like, Trump doesn't like campaigning when he's not on the ballot. He doesn't like, he's not an old school party guy. Maybe it'll be different this time as he's on his way out and he only has so many times where he's going to be able to do this kind of barnstorming. Maybe he'll feel invigorated to do it. But in 2022, he didn't. He picked bad candidates and he didn't really support them.
He did a lot of campaigning actually in 2022. More than people maybe remember. Like when Rubio was nominated for Secretary of State, I just went and looked back at, Trump wasn't getting that as much coverage at the time, but he did rallies for, he went around the country doing rallies, maybe not a ton, not presidential election level.
But you know how Trump rallies are not built around the other candidate that actually is on the ballot.
I know, but he did
Trump
them anyway.
rallies are built around, they're built around
which showed
him,
that he was, in fact, in a sense, a party man.
Yeah, I mean, he did them. Yeah, that's true. That's true. I guess his coattails are always curious in non-presidential years. Like I don't really know
in 2020,
exactly what his halo is.
I think Democrats. I mean, there was just a special election in Iowa yesterday where a Democrat won a state Senate seat in a Trump plus 20 or something district. So I mean, I think a
and
rule
Seltzer in ascendancy.
I don't know that. I think Ann Salter did not weigh in on this one. I think she's safely ensconced.
No, she's like, told you, gotcha. It took a little while. Yeah.
No, I think that was a warranted retirement given the epic fail of that particular poll.
Oh my God.
That was bad.
That was a stinker.
That even got me like questioning myself. Like, did I miss something? Is there actually this big?
That was the thing that I kept going back to that caucus, and I'm like, these people would die. They would die for Trump. I can't imagine that he is in any way that much less popular.
There are plenty of people who would also die or crawl over broken glass to vote against Trump. Not as many as there would have been in 2020 or 2016, but still
sure.
A segment. But the
I
point is,
I just didn't know in Iowa. In Iowa, it was that result was always curious to me.
Right, but the caucus electorate and the general electorate are just so radically different. So yeah, there would be caucus goers who would have that motivation, but the general electorate, it's just so many orders of magnitude different. So, which is why the rule of thumb seems to still apply for the Trump era, which is that with Trump just in the ether, with Trump just kind of animating people's perception of the Republican Party writ large, that can benefit Democrats in lower turnout races like special elections.
Yes,
but with Trump on the ballot, that's a bonanza for the Republicans because Trump transcends his identification with the Republican Party,
and
so those vaunted low propensity voters. Like I remember in the 2022 midterms, I was in Pennsylvania, and I was talking to somebody who thought. I asked her if she was going to vote. She was like a Republican leaning person, and she was like, she was asking me like, "Is Trump? Am I going to go vote for Trump?" Like she didn't know if the midterm elections were about going to vote for Trump. When I told her no, Trump's not on the ballot, but I explained to her the mechanics of it. She wasn't going to go bother to vote. But if Trump was on the ballot, she would have. So you have this weird dynamic now where the Democrats do benefit from the anti-Trump animosity among their most activated core of voters, and Republicans benefit when you have the entire electorate involved because of the motivational power of Trump. But it's a weird kind of perpetual pendulum swing thing. Although I'm still working out like how exactly that translated to 2024, because in 2020 you had Republican candidates often overperforming Trump. Like the Republicans won the increased their margin in the House. in 2020, although Trump lost the popular vote by 4+ points. Whereas Trump way overperformed, especially in the Senate.
Yeah.
In Nevada.
Oh yeah, in those. I mean, like they would have 3 more Senate seats if some of those candidates had kept pace.
Yeah. So it's always a mixed bag, I guess. But I think those general dynamics still kind of tend to hold.
I certainly think so. I think that the Democratic electorate, for whatever it is, are everyday voters. They will be activated and they will go vote in special elections. They'll vote in midterm elections. It remains to be seen whether or not this new coalition that the Republicans,
which used to be true of that used to be the advantage. Like in 2008, the whole idea of the Obama campaign was like, look, we got to go and organize these low propensity voters.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the Republicans, they always overperform in low turnout scenarios, so midterms and whatever, and that was true in the Obama era. 2010, 2014.
And now we've flipped.
And now it's totally flipped, which would, I mean, that a lesson I take from that is you got to be humble about your ability to project out in the future, because that would have been almost impossible to foresee.
Oh, God, yeah.
10 or 15 years ago.
I know. I mean, based on what all the writing was at that time, we would be in the midst of the permanent Democratic majority.
I was never convinced of that. Like the demographics or destiny people, I thought that was always like an oversimplification based on kind of crass.
Even
reductionism.
even if you actually read like Rui Teixeira's writing on it was a lot more nuanced than what it wound up becoming, which was like more browns equal good for blue, which was the bumper sticker. All right, well, I got to let you go. I told you right before we recorded I wanted to talk about things that were happening now. What matters and what doesn't matter. Turns out we wound up bonding talking about politics and the 2024 race. But it means we have to have you back on. Michael, where can people find your writing?
You can go to mtracy.net, powered by Substack. You can also go to mtracy on X, Tracey with an E, that is. And that should do it.
I would highly recommend anybody who enjoys this and enjoys the fact that this is one of the few outlets that is totally powered by you, the listener and the viewer, to go out and actually like fly to different places and be in the press pens and talk to the people that are around there. Michael is another one of those people. If you enjoy that element of this program, then you're very much going to enjoy his writing and his reporting. Thank you so much.
I am going to try to get into the press. I'm going to just as to comment on something that's happening in the moment.
Oh, are you coming? Are you coming to the White House press corps?
I applied. I mean, they put out the invitation for the new media to apply. I mean, I do have some affiliations with older media, like I write for Newsweek and places, but. I mean, I'm going to take them at their word, at least for now, and hope that it's not just all, Trump ass kissers.
I need to apply. I do need to apply. I hope that it continues to go long enough that I can get the opportunity before some dipshit tries to do like the Mayo challenge next to Ed O'Keefe and everything gets spiked, because that's the only problem with letting.
I mean, the
internet is not the internet is not a place for nice things. The internet is a place for very silly.
I mean, the
people.
worry is it's just an excuse for them to bring in a bunch of pro-Trump influencers to do content creation under the guise of journalism, because the fake news media is bad. Like if that's
that would essentially just make it more like what the press is normally when there's a Democratic president in there, where everybody's just kind of repeating the talking points that they want to talk about each day. So maybe it'll just make it just as useless as it used to be. All right, Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
All right, take care.
And that'll wrap it up for us today. Politics, written and hosted by me, Justin Robert Young, for Dog and Pony Show Audio in Austin, Texas. You want to send me an email, it is theyoungamerican@gmail.com. Find, follow, and share video clips of the show on TikTok. It is Justin R. Young. Justin R. Young on Instagram. Justin R. Young on X. And you can follow me on YouTube, Politics. That's where you get the video version of the show. If you want to hit me off with a one-time donation, it is paypal.me/PayJury. Venmo is Justin-Young-20, and our Cash app is PX3Cash. You can find our P.O. Box, where you can send me anything you'd like in the mail. Post Office Box, 153184, Austin, Texas, 78715. Again, that is P.O. Box, 153184, Austin, Texas, 78715. The only way you can get bonus content, there is one way to get it. I'll tell you what it is. It is TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Paying members get 2 bonus episodes each and every week, either $3 for a week or $12. It's billed monthly. Or $99 for the entire year. That's 150 episodes of PX30 for under $100. Or if you'd like to hear your name on the show, head on over to our founding tier. That is where you get your name read at the end of the show, like these fine folks in our Titanic founding tier, including L3PO, P-Paw, Scott, Middle-Aged Mike, Tom, Sarah Jeannie, Jeremy, Pro, Idiot, Chiller Tomatoes, oh yeah, it's Adam, Neil, AB Puppy, Just Another Pilot, Dr. Whiskey, Michael, Fat Tony's PJs from New York, Will Porta, The Borge B, Matthew, Matt, Andrew, Edwin, Sam, Andrew, Phil, Edison, Devon, Paul, a dog named Truckers, Gloria, Jerry, Trucker, John, Berkeley Stephen, and Zombie Doc. You want your name read on the show? Only one place to do it. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Next week, we are going to welcome back Chris Cillizza. He has his So What Substack. He often has a feature called Chris Crucial, but I will ask whether or not he should be called Chris Contrition. He has now apologized twice. Two different stories that he covered while he was at CNN, Joe Biden's decline and the COVID lab leak. We're going to talk about media. It's going to be about media. You guys like it when we talk media? We're going to talk media. So Cillizza's coming back on the show, and then we will have some other folks. It'll be a good time. Well, that's it. Till next time. This is your old pal, Justin Robert Young, saying some shows talk about politics, others talk about politics, and still more discuss politics. But this is the only show that dares discuss, three.